You know, they fight with lawfare. This champion of free markets, Peter Thiel, this libertarian god here, who's really the guy kind of running a lot of these things. He took down Gawker using lawfare and suits after, the story is after they kind of released some personal stuff about his life, and maybe his sexual orientation and some stuff, but really it was because they published the Epstein list.
Yeah, the year they went after him was the year that Gawker, it was the first publication to make public the Epstein Black Book. And at the time, Peter Thiel was meeting with Epstein pretty consistently between 2014 and 2015. So hard to know,
right,
really, what the reason was, but people were definitely not happy that Black Book came out, because the person who, obtained it was actually Epstein's butler, and he was, killed off in prison in 2015, the same year. So, kind of complicated stuff. And as far as Peter Thiel being a free market libertarian, he's pretty open. Well, he's on video and in writings has said that he doesn't like free market competition. It's actually for losers. He thinks, and that his definition of a capitalist is someone who accrues capital. So someone that believes in free market capitalism but isn't a millionaire, to Peter Thiel, isn't really a capitalist very much. Like someone like Reid Hoffman, who backed Kamala heavily, for example, would be more of a capitalist to Peter Thiel than someone like yourself, Marty.
Yeah. Yeah, it's been interesting, like the Epstein, Diddy stuff leading up to it. You look at the Leviathan that backed Kamala specifically, and Reid Hoffman on the list as well. Like, it seems like there was anybody who was at Diddy parties or on the list.
Well, I think there's also, it didn't just happen with Diddy. It also happened with Epstein. There's been a deliberate effort, in my opinion, to cultivate the perception that the only people that are sexually compromised or that are pedophiles in the United States are celebrities and Democrats only, when it is, if you look at the evidence, and I wrote a 1,000-page book that goes over the history of sexual blackmail operations, including those involving children, it's very clearly both parties. And probably no government was more guilty of that than the Reagan-Bush era, with the Franklin scandal, and a lot of the other things that were, oversawn as part of that, or like Iran-Contra drug trafficking, helping facilitate BCCI, which the U.S. Senate report admits was also sex trafficking minors to elites of the United Arab Emirates, including prepubescent children. Right. So this is something that has consistently been both parties. And, the idea that it's only one partisan side, I think is very complicated and ultimately not true, and could potentially be used for troubling, ends. And as far, I have an article that I haven't finished yet because I've had a lot of other stuff going on, about, the overlaps between the Epstein and Diddy networks. And it's really not exclusively partisan, and there's a lot of very deliberate overlaps. The biggest one being, I guess, Ron Burkle, who owns the Kroger supermarkets, between the two, who hasn't even been discussed at all, even though he was a big Clinton donor. Why does his name not get brought up? But it's like, a lot of focus on, big name celebrities, perhaps, and, Democrat candidates. But, Ron Burkle was also all over the Epstein Clinton flights. Don't you think that people would want to call that out? It's kind of weird that his name's been left out of it. And there's other names as well that have been, left out of it too. I would argue, unfortunately. But again, I think it's part of this effort to sort of sensationalize, the very real scandals around Epstein and Diddy, and, scandals like that, and try and sort of make it more of a spectacle and have people be like, oh, look at these evil, naughty celebrities, and not really look at how our government has consistently enabled this type of behavior. Why is the FBI or the government only going after these people when they did, when most of their crimes were committed many, many years ago? There's a lot of, things I could, I guess, add to that. But essentially, I don't really like that it's being treated as partisan, when the historical record very clearly shows it's a bipartisan disease, and that both parties have been very compromised by it for a long time, that it's essentially something that was done through this unholy alliance, if you will, between organized crime and intelligence agencies, which, as I note a lot in my book with a lot of facts to back it up, you can't really tell where organized crime and intelligence agencies end and begin. There are for all intents and purposes, the same. And so, and I think it's complicated too that you have people like, this, figure named Chuck Johnson, who's very close to, Peter Thiel, actually had Peter Thiel become an FBI informant at his behest, openly saying that Jeffrey Epstein was actually a patriot and Ghislaine Maxwell should be released from prison, and things of that nature. Like, is there going to be, a rebrand or something, by media operatives that have ties, to the state of Israel, for example, that Epstein was also tied to, trying to rebrand their guy as someone that was just trying to keep the Dems from doing the wrong things or something like that. I don't know, but why is someone saying that? Personally, I find that stuff kind of concerning, and a lot of, hints from people like Megyn Kelly that we'll be hearing from Epstein really soon, and there's going to be a big twist in the story. I just really don't trust the partisan, bent of that. Personally, I think it's going to be, misused, and it doesn't fit with the facts, frankly. Is it true that there are very problematic people involved in these scandals that back Kamala? Absolutely. Absolutely. Reid Hoffman obviously being the most obvious, but it's fair to say that Peter Thiel and also Elon Musk, have their Epstein ties as well. It just hasn't been, of interest as much, to people in certain media circles, but, there's definitely, facts pointing to that. A lot of them I've discussed in my book. Some came out after my book was published, when a lot of these discovery documents from the USVI case against JP Morgan, as it related to Epstein, were, sort of released, at least aspects of them were, by the Wall Street Journal, which also illuminated the extent to which he met with Reid Hoffman. But, that was the first time that it was officially confirmed that Peter Thiel, met extensively with Epstein previously. It was, I had to speculate about that for the purpose of my book, because there were plenty of indicators suggesting that was the case. Now we know it's the case. And there's a lot that hasn't come out, about Epstein, and there's still not a lot of interest in Epstein in particular, on the financial crime angle of that, which I think is really significant. And, the fact that they make it sort of this sensationalized, salacious, story that it's, all about just, these terrible sex acts and stuff. It's a lot bigger story, and there's not a lot of interest in going after it, I think, because a lot of the people implicated are some of the biggest people in Silicon Valley. Elon Musk, Sergey Brin, and Larry Page were all subpoenaed as part of that Epstein case. Tom Pritzker of the Pritzker family. And these are people that, play both sides of the political divide also. But they all seem to have that, behind them. And sometimes, it may not be convenient. You have Elon Musk going out saying like Reid Hoffman should be very afraid, about the information about Epstein coming out. But, as I said earlier, and as I've said on other podcasts, and as noted in my book, Elon Musk had business ties with Jeffrey Epstein and was subpoenaed as part of this, banking probe into the financing, or his connections to JP Morgan and other things, which is not just the sex trafficking thing. It's also connected with the financial crime aspect of it, because if you look into a lot of Epstein's financial stuff, he was involved in essentially collapsing Bear Stearns, which was essentially executed intentionally as part of, the 2008, crisis. And then, he switches banks to JP Morgan, and that's the bank that buys up Bear Stearns, all of their assets for pennies on the dollar. And, when Epstein popped one of, Bear Stearns' one of their most over leveraged funds, which essentially created the conditions that led to Bear Stearns, collapsing. People were like, well, he lost a lot of money, but as the Martins reported on Wall Street on Parade, he also got essentially a secret, multi-million dollar bailout from the Fed. So he didn't really lose any money. And, you don't hear this stuff discussed about Epstein. You don't hear, mentions about Diddy teaming up with the Bronfman family or the Lauder family. He absolutely did. And there are, connections of that, of course, to the Epstein scandal is noted in my book. But again, it's a focus on sensationalism and trying to use it for partisan means. And ultimately, when we play those games, everyone ends up losing because we're not getting to the truth of the matter. And by not getting to the truth of the matter, we're unable to root out this evil from our society.